This presentation is a follow-up to the YouTube video, Theory of Democratic Voice Expression. Much of the material there is being represented here, in the specific context of Canada. A familiarity with the concepts of democratic voice expression is largely assumed here. Single-member district proportional representation, SMDPR, achieves three democratic goals in unison: maximum voice expression, maximum accountable local representation, and control of strong governance. Equal and independent voice in the deliberations of government for all eligible citizens defines democracy, arising as it does from a mindset in the people that favors consensus expressed through voice over charisma expressed through force. A last stage in failure to agree, majority rule defines a limit of democracy, not its essence. Governance derives strength and durability from fostering a bond between local and national interests through accountable local representation. Achieving high accountable local representation with single-member districts requires separating voice from advocacy using the concepts of allocation and matching divisions. Allocation divisions for voice and matching divisions for accountable local representation. Voice is inherently non-local, being used only to establish governance periodically. Local representation or advocacy is ongoing, personal, and most importantly nonpartisan. Separating voice from advocacy using allocation and matching divisions provides a natural threshold. Nonpartisan adjustment of the natural threshold can address several potential problems in democracy, such as gridlock, population growth, regionalization, representation of significant but sparsely distributed visible minorities, and focusing national debate. Political parties do not have voice, they express voice. They represent a focus of the voice of the people around current issues. Shown here is an example SMDPR allocation matching division structure for Canada. Complying with federal structure, each allocation division consists of ridings drawn from the same province. Each has 10 to 14 ridings, excepting Prince Edward Island and the Territories. Each riding is a matching division. There is no change to the bounds, nature, or political function of ridings, and no change in the size of the House. Each riding has one representative, of which there are no other kinds and so no hierarchy of representatives. The seats within each allocation division are allocated to parties proportional to their total ballot count within the allocation division. For instance, in a 10-seat allocation division, a party polling 10% of the total allocation division ballot count will be allocated one seat, 20% will guarantee allocation of 2 seats, etc. In a 15-seat allocation division, 6.67% of the total count will guarantee each seat. This threshold or quotient is called natural because it arises from structure without bias. Because the number of ballots a party polls is almost never an integer multiple of the quotient, some seats are matched on partial quotients. This means there is no way to know beforehand which seats a party will match. Therefore, in order to match any of its allocated seats, a party must run candidates in all ridings of an allocation division. Because of this, a national party in Canada would still need to run 338 candidates, just as now. However, allocation matching division structure has two additional important effects. First, Canada's current single-member plurality SMP system disproportionately awards seats to large and/or regional parties. Every ballot being treated equally means this does not happen under SMDPR. Second, federal SMDPR parties will almost always have regional representation, and consequently a broadly formed cabinet. There are many ways to allocate partial quotient seats, the easiest to understand being by largest remainder, i.e., after seats are allocated based on full quotients, largest remainder is used to allocate remaining seats. Largest remainder is used in all calculations supporting facts presented here, but the D'Hondt method ensures the largest number of essential ballots and is therefore the preferred method for democracy. Allocated seats are matched to a candidate and their riding based solely on local performance, generally with a party's best performing candidates taking the party's allocated seats. However, to be elected, a candidate must poll high enough to claim one of their party's allocated seats, and outpoll any candidate in their riding that does the same, which can sometimes lead to lower-ranked candidates claiming a party's seats. Same party candidates compete with each other but not from the same pool of voters, so their competition is creative for the party. Because of this, SMDPR candidates and representatives are both more important to their party and in Parliament than under SMP. Once all seats are matched, the matched candidates are declared elected. Note that single-member district proportional's natural threshold can be raised or lowered to control the number of seated parties, either to break legislative gridlock or to accommodate population changes. Obviously, such control must be exercised on a nonpartisan basis. Here is a graphic depiction of how SMP and SMDPR function and fundamentally differ. It also encapsulates the heart of all electoral reform arguments when stripped of CRAP, or CRAP, which is the acronym for circular reasoning and pomposity. Shown are two groups of 10 shaded disks, each bounded by a colored circle and closing colored dots. Each disk represents a riding. The color of the circle indicates which party won the riding. The enclosed dots represent ballots. The colors represent different parties. Winning a seat is set by SMP's plurality rule on the left of the center circle and by single-member district proportional's allocation matching rules in the middle circle and on the right. In this case, the red party sweeps all 10 seats under SMP, despite polling only 40% of the ballots cast. Under SMDPR, the red party would be allocated 4 seats or 40% of the total. The other parties would be allocated seats similarly and as shown. Two things are immediately evident. First, SMDPR expresses the voice of voters much better than does SMP, in direct consequence. And second, some pluralities lose under SMDPR. The crux of electoral reform arguments is that voice is constitutionally protected by preferred right. Unlike any of the other issues raised by those opposed to reform, to exercise a constitutionally enshrined and preferred right to citizens' voices, it is sometimes necessary to ignore local pluralities, which lack constitutional status anyway. Laws are not passed in ridings. There is no constitutional right to voice for ridings. But citizens have a preferred constitutional right to voice. The representatives with whom citizens identify should enact laws, not the winners of a political sideshow. SMP is, and always has been, a democratic farce. A blue representative cannot speak for a red identifying citizen, because a partisan representative can speak only for citizens of the same partisan persuasion. Thinking otherwise is the unconstitutional and voice-destroying defect of SMP. On the other hand, advocacy is nonpartisan. The partisan persuasion of an advocate doesn't matter for advocacy, which is why advocacy is the same under SMDPR as under SMP. In addition, pluralities win in over 80% of ridings under SMDPR, a greater concordance with pluralities than with any other system in major world use. What SMP-using democracies like Canada, the US, and UK have is called agonarchy, defined as an arena of conflict for spectacle in which winning and losing are decided by an arbitrary rule, in this case, the plurality rule. An overhang occurs when a party would get more seats through plurality than it deserves through proportionality, as in the previous example. The 6 extra seats the red party deserved by plurality are called overhang seats. Losing pluralities is one of 3 ways to deal with overhangs. New Zealand lets the overhang stand by enlarging the legislature with overhang seats. This effectively creates voice out of thin air rather than from ballots, obviously impairs proportionality, and also introduces a new kind of representative, risking a hierarchy of representatives. All of these compromise voice expression. Obviously, the legislature is enlarged, making it more expensive and less efficient. Perhaps most importantly, this method of dealing with overhangs fractures accountable local representation by either creating representatives that have no riding responsibility or diminishing accountability within a riding by having more than one representative. In this way, either some ridings are special or some representatives are. If the legislature isn't enlarged, then the ridings must be. This either emphasizes the difference between riding representatives and overhang representatives or reduces accountability of local representation through having multiple local representatives for a gigantic riding. Accountable local representation is important to national unity and governance strength, the more so in large countries. Germany deals with overhangs as does New Zealand, but restores proportionality by adding leveling seats, as shown on the far right. This comes closer to proportionality, but only by worsening all the faults already mentioned. The strongest argument against dealing with overhangs other than by losing pluralities is consequent compromise of voice expression in pursuit of artificial proportionality, thus fracturing the bond between people and power by destroying accountability of local representation, which strikes at the heart of strong governance. What makes local representation accountable, beside clear responsibility, is that all ballots must be essential. Changing even one of them must make a difference to the outcome. This is an ideal that is most closely approached by SMDPR, since by design it maximizes essential ballots. In any case, losing pluralities is Canada's only option because ridings are created or destroyed using a constitutionally mandated formula. There is no provision for riding creation by electoral system. Use of a two-choice, four-option ballot preserves the traditional SMP ballot and method of casting that ballot, yet allows nuance of choice for both local representative and party. It also preserves the security of an easily counted paper ballot. The left column is a traditional SMP ballot of local candidates with parenthetical party affiliation. It's been around since 1960, before which party affiliation was not mentioned. The right-hand side is a bare list of parties running candidates in the allocation division. A single X in the left-hand column is casting a ballot in the traditional way. It signifies 2 ballots for the parenthetical party and 2 ballots for the local candidate. If the voter chooses, 2 X's can be made in each column for a more nuanced vote. Choice of party takes precedence over parenthetical choice. In the example shown, there are 2 ballots for local candidates and 2 for party voices. None of the above allows a protest ballot with mandatory voting. This slightly more complicated ballot raises the average support for the winning candidate from 48% under SMP to over 60% under SMDPR, which means the average local popularity of representatives is 12 percentage points higher or 25% higher under SMDPR than under SMP, and higher again than any other system in major world use. Yes, SMDPR has losing pluralities, but despite that, the average winning candidate is more popular than under SMP. Only SMP uses pluralities as the only way to elect representatives. To explain the mechanics of SMDPR, start with an allocation division of 10 ridings, labeled A through J. Each riding is represented by a circle containing dots of 4 different colors. Each colored dot represents a ballot for a particular political party. The black dots are electors who didn't vote. Each circle is colored and shaded inside with the party colors that polled a plurality in the riding. 6 red and 4 blue here. To rank candidates on purely local results, count up the ballots for each candidate in each riding and divide by the number of electors in the riding. In this case 12. Electors is used instead of number of voters to remove a gameable variable. Suppressing ballots has less effect this way. The result is a decimal fraction as shown and based entirely on local performance. This is done for all 10 ridings. The natural quotient of an allocation division is the reciprocal of the number of seats in the division, in this case 1 over 10 equal to 0.1, or 10%. To be guaranteed a seat allocation, a party must poll 10% of the aggregate ballot count in the allocation division. In this case 10% of 100 is 10 ballots, as shown under the riding circles and ranking calculations. Here, 60% of the seats are red and 40% are blue. Only 37 ballots are essential. 63 make no difference to the result. Seats are allocated based on ballots polled by each party, as shown in the top table to the right of the riding circles. These ballot counts are re-expressed as multiples of the quotient plus a residual, as shown in the bottom table beside the riding circles. The red party's 42 ballots is 4 quotients of 10 each plus a residual of 2, since each quotient allocates a seat. A total of 8 seats are allocated this way as shown inside the tall outline box. The remaining 2 seats are allocated based on the highest residual. There are many ways of handling residuals. Dehunt is constitutionally preferred, but highest remainder, used here, is easier to describe. Here, we have a tie between the blue and orange parties, but since there are 2 seats to be awarded, that doesn't matter. If a tie does matter, the winner is decided by a random number assigned in secret before the election. All 10 seats are now allocated, 4 for red, 3 for blue, 2 for orange, and 1 for green. Now create a list of local candidates' rankings from highest to lowest, as shown by the ranked column in 2 parts shown to the right. Any ties are again settled by a random number chosen in secret prior to the election. The top 4 candidates are all red, and red is allocated 4 seats, so the top 4 red candidates and their ridings are matched, indicated by a colored star to the left of the seat label. Blue is allocated 3 seats, so the top 3 blue candidates with their ridings are matched. Orange is allocated 2 seats, but the top 3 orange candidates are in ridings already won by red or blue since orange's results in those ridings are lower than red and blue. Orange's 2 seats have to come from farther down the list as indicated. The top green candidate does not clash with any other party, so that is matched as indicated. The same result is achieved no matter which party is matched first. For instance, if orange is matched first, the first 2 orange candidates are matched. If red and blue are done next, in any order, the 2 orange candidates are outpolled and so lose. The party, however, retains its allocation of 2 seats, which will eventually be filled by the 2 candidates matched the first way. Once all parties have been matched, the matched candidates are declared elected. To be guaranteed an allocation, a candidate must a. belong to a party that is allocated seats, b. poll high enough within their own party to be matched to a seat, and c. outpoll any local candidate that achieves A and B. The only other way to be allocated a seat is by chance on a fractional quotient. A very important subtlety is created by this process. Because of allocation based on residual ballots, there is no certain way to predict which candidates will win beforehand. That means that in order for a party to match its allocated seats, it must run candidates in every riding. This is a natural and inherent bar that must be cleared for any party. The same bar of running candidates in all 338 ridings under SMP. Note that for the same reason, there are no safe or sacrificial ridings. Every ballot counts no matter where it is cast. Additionally, since any riding can win, all ridings will offer the highest quality candidate because the highest quality has valid reason to run, which has beneficial effects on politics overall. The results are shown to the right of the candidate ranking table. Each circle representing a riding is now cleared according to SMDPR allocation rules. The tables underneath the ridings show both the percentages of seats won by each party, as well as the essential ballots for each party. Under the plurality rule, 37% of ballots are essential and 63% have no voice represented in the deliberations of the government. Under SMDPR, 98% of ballots have voice represented in the deliberations of the government. Only party list systems can achieve this. SMDPR is a local party list system, as is SMP. The difference is proportional representation with SMDPR. There are 3 losing pluralities here: D, G, and H. Each still has a local representative. You will work all the harder to advocate for constituents. The critical and constitutional difference between SMP and SMDPR is vastly greater voice expression with SMDPR. Voice expression is a preferred right embedded in the Constitution. The plurality rule is embedded in the electoral system only, and as ruled in Figueroa, the abrogation of political preferences is not to be elevated to constitutional status, nor does Section 3 protect values or objectives embedded in our current electoral system. The right to voice is constitutionally ascribed to citizens, not to ridings. Note that these calculations can be done by computer for all 338 ridings in real time. Let's turn to the national effects and utility of allocation matching division structure. To win a seat under Canada's SMP electoral system requires 1 more ballot than the next highest candidate. If there are 2 candidates, then 50% plus 1 will win. With 3 parties, 33.33% plus 1 can win, etc. There has been a Quebec riding decided on 28%, but as population rises, there is no lower limit on how few ballots would be needed to win, or equivalently how many parties could form, limited only by the number of ridings. As the population grows, there is no structural limit on the number of seated parties. The country can become more and more divided and government harder and harder to form. One suspects that a large number of parties would cause SMP to fail. The other hurdle to be cleared by a national party is to run candidates in every riding, which takes extensive organization and funding. This is hard to measure, except to say, the more ridings, the fewer national seated parties. Now, consider 33 Canadian SMDPR allocation divisions as listed earlier, each with a little more than 10 ridings, for calculation purposes. To be guaranteed allocation of a seat, a party must poll 10% of 515,152 ballots. But to match that allocation, the party must run candidates in every riding of the allocation division. To be a national party under SMDPR requires achieving this in at least 29 of the 33 divisions. The three territories and Prince Edward Island will always yield SMP-like results because of their small size. In fact, SMDPR with one riding in an allocation division is SMP. Thus, both SMDPR and SMP require candidates to be run in all ridings. This inherent and unbiased threshold created by allocation matching division structure prevents regionalization in most circumstances. More subtly, allocation matching structure allows the electoral system to adapt to population changes while controlling the number of parties. With a population increase, for instance, each new quotient can be accommodated by a new matching division. The threshold will drop slightly, favoring new parties, as perhaps is appropriate for a population increase. Assuming the country functions well on a structure based on 10 matching divisions per allocation division, an addition of 5 to 10 quotients can justify the addition of a new allocation division, raising the threshold back to a level that will put stress on new political parties. Those with real value will survive, but the formation of government will continue to be as easy or hard as nonpartisan judgment demands. Difficulty in forming government and gridlock can be broken by either increasing or decreasing the threshold, as appropriate. If there are already a lot of parties, then reducing the number of matching divisions per allocation division will raise the natural threshold, favoring a consequent decrease in the number of parties. The reverse change is achieved by increasing the threshold. All such decisions must be nonpartisan. As a practical example, Israel has 120 seats in a single allocation division consisting of a single matching division for 4.5 million voters, yielding a natural quotient of 0.83% in a partyless electoral system. This supports 39 parties, of which 13 are seated. Forming government is difficult. If Israel had SMDPR with 12 allocation divisions of 10 matching divisions each, the natural quotient would be 10%. At that threshold, the Israel electorate might support 10 parties, of which perhaps 3 would be seated over time. Forming government should be less difficult. SMDPR's natural quotient is unbiased. Returning to the mechanics of SMDPR, here is an allocation division similar to the one used previously, but with a few ballots changed. Allocation is the same, but the Green Party must match riding B here, in which it ran no candidate. The seat can be allocated to the next highest remainder, which is the Red Party here, or it could be allocated to the plurality winner, which is again Red Party. Alternatively, the green ballots can be excluded and all rankings recalculated, yielding a new allocation. There are lots of ways to recover. The important point is that a party can't know beforehand which seats it will definitely match. Matching an allocated seat thus requires a party-run candidates in all matching divisions, a barrier to small parties and independents. This mechanism is justified because national questions deserve to be addressed by parties with serious national presence. Minorities should never have majority power. On the other hand, the democratic contract requires that majority power should never be oppressive. Minorities must be heard, considered, and, where possible, accommodated. Another takeaway from this example is how well the overall result is balanced under SMDPR. Most seats are predictable from local plurality or majority, but almost all ballots are essential. Changing a handful of ballots can change the result in detail. Sometimes not even polling a local majority is enough under SMDPR. For example, the Liberals polled about 63% of the ballots in Nova Scotia 2015 results. 10 majorities and 1 plurality. Under SMDPR, the plurality win and 3 of the majority wins would have lost on proportional allocation, as befitting voice representation of almost 40% of the voters. This was an example of the dangers of regionalization under SMP. A look at seats won by ballots polled under SMP shows that large parties seat more representatives per ballots polled than do smaller parties. The red dots are above the equality line over about 35% of the ballots polled. Importantly, the same is true for regional parties. Many of the blue dots are above equality as well. This unfairness arises from the effects of the plurality rule, i.e., through inefficiency of ballots it favors large parties and separatist parties. For instance, had Quebec used SMDPR, the Bloc Québécois would never have had a majority government, the highest poll result having been 49.26 in 1981, marked with a star above. For this reason, it is very unlikely there would have been a referendum on Quebec separation under SMDPR. Such a decision should require a provincial supermajority of 75% in any case. Legally, separation would also require approval of all 10 provincial legislatures. Such supermajorities for deciding constitutional questions have obvious importance for stability. Parity of ridings is immaterial because all ballots under SMDPR count as one of all the ballots cast in the allocation division, not as one of all the ballots cast in the riding as under SMP. Regionalization arises from a concentrated population having some sociocultural discriminant. Difference is then gained by political parties using the plurality rule, creating greater power for the minority than would be allocated by proportionality. The games played include exploiting differences using wedge issues, character assassination, push polls, attack ads, robocalls, kamikaze candidates, etc. All of these divide the nation. Because of the plurality rule, the Brown Party here is allocated all 10 ridings, even though they have only 30% of the ballots. SMDPR prevents this, as shown on the right. In reality, gaming the plurality rule enlarges the non-voter category, allowing a win with even fewer ballots, not reflected here. This example also demonstrates that any party able to poll the natural quotient is represented in an allocation division by simply running a candidate in each matching division. Not only is it harder to control a region under SMDPR, but it is also more likely that a party achieving government will have representatives in all or most provinces of the country. As a result of allocation matching division structure and the above considerations, SMDPR prevents regionalization better than does SMP. Indeed, SMP encourages both regionalization and separatist parties. Proportional representation provides fair representation to all, including minorities visible or otherwise. Unfortunately, political parties are not always open to minorities. SMDPR has the capacity to represent visible minorities by one of their own while integrating the minority into political parties. Since every ballot counts equally within an allocation division, it is possible to create a matching division small enough so that a visible minority constitutes most of its citizens. The 7 squares in E plus the 3 other squares scattered in other ridings make a single quotient for visible minority in the division, with E as its main concentration, and indigenous reservation perhaps. Proportional representation of voice isn't affected, but one of the voices will be from the visible minority concentrated in E. Each party will be virtually forced to choose a candidate from the visible minority, one of which will represent the riding, and all of which will have an influence in their party. Changing matching division size should only be done when the visible minority has at least one quotient in the allocation division, a decision that must be nonpartisan. Without the plurality rule, a number of highly divisive gaming tactics cease to provide much of any advantage. The only thing that will reliably lead to electoral success is offering a compelling vision for the country's future. Without the plurality rule, there are no sacrificial or safe ridings. Every vote counts equally and is essential for some candidate selection in more than 95% of cases. Proportional representation does not discriminate against women, ethnic groups, religions, or any other group. Each will have their ballots turned into voice in almost all cases. The elimination of divisive tactics and greater emphasis on content rather than creating a cult of personality will improve the tenor of politics, making engaging in politics more inviting. Knowing that every ballot is essential helps break a plurality rule-induced herd mentality, while encouraging greater turnout. In addition, visible minorities can be represented by one of their own where appropriate. Almost 2/3 of Canadians do not know who their MP is. A similar number have never visited their MP. 48% of SMP voters and 60% of SMDPR voters have an MP of their political persuasion. In addition, SMDPR makes it almost certain that the other 40% of SMDPR voters will have an MP of their political persuasion somewhere in the allocation division. SMDPR MPs function as a team, just as candidates do during election. All candidates share in securing seat allocation, whether they are themselves elected or not. After the election, MPs represent all candidates of their political persuasion in the allocation division, regardless of riding. Any local issue will continue to be advocated by the local MP, since that is nonpartisan. MPs in ridings created to represent a visible minority by one of their own will have less local work because the ridings are small. However, they will field work from the entire division of minority citizens, which must constitute a quotient before a minority riding can be created. The work done in the minority ridings for citizens from other ridings lessens the work done in those other ridings. Things average out. The Green MP in Riding J would handle political issues of voice for all Green citizens in the allocation division and advocate all issues local to J regardless of partisan persuasion. The visible minority MP forum Riding E would do the same. So, how good is SMDPR? To answer that question requires measures of democracy, of which there are none, other than the three presented here. Several indices have been created, but not measures. Political science has not defined democracy, but history and Canadian jurisprudence leave little doubt of what is needed, and here provided. The above definitions are generous, broad, and purposive. They avoid legalese and pay due respect to the inherent dignity of the individual, as enjoined by the Supreme Court of Canada in speaking about the right to vote. These definitions make measurement of democracy synonymous with measurement of voice, something easily achieved. Ballot split by type tells us what percentage of electors' voices are expressed in the legislature, accounting for non-participation and using ballot split by type into essential, surplus, and losing. Legislative Empowerment Measure, LEM, is the fraction of citizens' voices expressed in the deliberations of government. LEM accounts for 5 universal impediments to voice expression: disenfranchisement, non-participation, malapportionment, riding partisan mismatch, and inefficiency of ballots. LEM expresses the democratic power of a citizen, a representative, or the legislature. Accountable being the obverse of essential, an accountable local representation measure, ALRM, is LEM per average number of riding representatives, the latter being the number of representative divided by the number of matching divisions. It is an expression of essential ballots supporting an average representative. All three measures are objective and universal. All arise only from electoral data. Ballot split by type shows percentages of voters not citizens. This is a more limited view of an electoral system, focused on how inefficient ballots are, ignoring most other impediments. In 2015, 52% of Canadian voters cast a ballot for a candidate who lost, leaving them voiceless in the deliberations of government. 18% of ballots were surplus to the win and were therefore also voiceless. The argument that surplus ballots actually do have voice can only be supported if the voice they have comes at the expense of ballots necessary for the win, which is mathematically equivalent to surplus ballots having no power and essential ballots having all the power. Surplus and losing are together called inefficient, whereas essential are called efficient. 70% of voters were voiceless in the deliberations of government in the 2015 election. All SMDPR results are based on data from an SMP election, in which strategic voting and PO turnout skew the results. The expected value would be in the mid-50s, as discussed in greater detail later. LEM is presented as a stacked column showing the 5 universal impediments to voice expression, topped by effective voice expression. In the column shown, the bottom segment shows 27% of Canadian citizens were not eligible to vote in 2015. 23% of citizens didn't vote. Differences in numbers of riding electors impeded the equivalent of 4% of citizens, and politics riding mismatch impeded the equivalent of another 3%. 29% of citizens cast ballots that made no difference to the result. Overall, 88% of Canadian citizens had no voice in the deliberations of government. Only 12% of citizens had voice. The US SMP system provided the same 12% voice to an average citizen. Canada does not have an equivalent of a presidential veto, but in the US a 2/3 veto power impedes voice for all but 4% of US citizens. Accountable Local Representation Measure, ALRM, is presented as a column representing LEM per average number of representative per riding. Since Canada had a LEM of 12 and has only 1 representative per riding, ALRM was also 12. If there were an average of 2 representatives per riding, the ALRM would be 6. Another way to view ballots split by type is with pie charts, the data aggregated over all 44 Canadian general elections in the case shown. The chart on the left repeats the data previously presented in a stacked column. No more than 30% of all Canadian voters have had voice in the deliberations of government for over a century and a half. The center chart shows the same data as a percentage of electors, some of whom choose not to vote. This is important because the voting system can induce voters to stay home on election day. As shown, only 21% of electors have had a voice in the deliberations of government. The chart on the right shows that the 21% of possible voters, electors, is split 11% for government and 10% for opposition. In summary, very few Canadians have voice, specifically because of inefficient ballots under the plurality rule. 1 percentage point separates government from opposition. Detection and aggressive gaming of that 1% using accurate polling, detailed databases, and patronage drive the divisive tactics used by political parties. The effects of the plurality rule is a major reason why Canadians are disaffected with politics. Why politics is so reprehensible and perceived as democratically corrupt. The system really does not express the voices of the people. Agonarchy is not democracy. Here is a chart of LEM for 9 electoral systems in major world use, as well as 2 implementations of SMDPR, one in each of Israel and Canada. Before comparing SMDPR, note that its performance here is based on SMP data, which is skewed by strategic voting, with no expectation of proportional results, and with consequent poor turnout. Greater attention to parity between sub-provincial allocation divisions and improved turnout from proportional expectations or mandatory voting should raise SMDPR's LEM to the mid-50s, as good as or better than Sweden. This is not surprising because SMDPR is the Swedish system applied to 33 allocation divisions, and with single-member ridings. In other words, SMDPR should yield the best expression of voice for citizens of any major world electoral system. Note that SMP systems are among the worst in the world at providing voice. U.S. voice is 12% of all citizens, as is Canada's, but U.S. voice is further impeded by a 2/3 presidential veto as previously mentioned, which reduces unimpeded voice expression to 4%. This is in keeping with the general sentiment of the Founding Fathers not to trust the people, not even to elect their own version of a king. Somehow this became known as the American democratic experiment, with checks and balances fundamental to democracy rather than voice expression. This leads to crap and revolution. Checks and balances are not fundamental to democracy, indeed even limited to democracy. We all live our lives with self-imposed checks and balances. Voice is the common foundation of all governance. That voice belongs to the people is what defines democracy. Wealth becomes concentrated by archaic SMP ideas of democracy, with government becoming an insurance policy for business in a neoliberal environment. In other words, government of the people, by the rich, for businesses. Once in power, the rich then spend from the public purse to keep the people silent by opposing electoral change to democracy. Crap breeds disgust and rebellion. Canadians have enough brains to appreciate that democracy is the best form of governance known. They only lack the interest and backbone to insist on all voices being expressed in our own governance. Democracy continually evolves. We are all founders of democracy, if we act. SMDPR is again based on SMP data, which lowers a LRM by about 12 percentage points. Even before that correction, SMDPR outperforms all comers. Ballot split by type reflects the mechanics of balloting only, taking no notice of turnout, lack of enfranchisement, etc. The goal of a democratic system must be to express voice for all citizens, which is done through essential ballots only. See Measuring Democratic Voice for logic and details. Clearly, list systems provide the greatest expression of voice, SMDPR being among the best. The claim is made that SMP provides strong government, and therefore no change is warranted. When asked to define strong government, the arguments proffered boil down to a haughty assertion: what SMP provides is strong government. A fine example of crap. Foundational to strong democratic government is voice expression and accountable local representation, which provide government by and for the people. SMDPR provides 4 or 5 times more voice and accountable local representation than SMP. But that is not the same as saying that SMDPR provides strong government. Strong government means different things to different people, usually invoking ineffable concepts of leadership and those led. Whatever the character and strength of a people or their leadership, strong democratic government should be quickly formed, durable, and productive, in addition to providing maximum voice expression. Government is by and for the people when all ballots are essential, when changing even one ballot can lead to a different outcome, when there is no other way to win than by convincing people that you are leading in the best direction. Durability requires an enduring sense of value of government to the electors and of electors to the government, which in turn depends on accountable local representation. Forming government quickly depends on how many parties there are and how divided they are. The number of parties can be controlled using the natural thresholds of allocation matching division structure under SMDPR. The divisions between parties can be characterized by their Gini coefficient and, again, controlled by allocation matching division structure. The best insurance of productivity is the absence of gridlock. This too depends in part on the number of parties. Gridlock can be broken either by increasing or reducing the number of parties going forward, using the thresholds of allocation matching division structure as a guide. It is important to not lose sight of the need for opposition, which is what helps prevent government from overreaching its mandate, or just making mistakes. It is the tension between voices of the people that moves good and popular legislation through the process of being enacted into law, and that reinforces the idea of the democratic contract. Without the plurality rule, parties can focus on enacting laws, doing as good a job as possible, because gaming is no longer an option. Of course, majority continues to rule parliament, but the more buy-in there is from the minority, the more popular will be the laws enacted. It is important to know that eminent academic Endlich Fart has shown proportional representation, PR, to be better than majoritarian governments at managing democracy, and at least as good as majoritarian governments at managing the economy. In other words, PR governments are at least as good at raising and accounting for money as are majoritarian governments like SMP, but are better at getting value for taxes raised. We have already seen that SMDPR can provide the highest voice expression and accountable local representation of any electoral system in major world use. These two underwrite the four elements of strong government on the previous slide. There remains the question of controlling the number of parties in an unbiased way to avoid incorrect gridlock and to quickly form government. Such control is also foundational to productivity. Productivity can be measured by the number of laws and regulations passed by a government, but there is no meaningful measure of the value of legislation. SMDPR provides the means to control the number of political parties in the form of allocation matching division structure. To construct an index summarizing what is measurable, note that the more ways there are to form government from parties elected, the longer it will take to form government, the less productive government promises to be, and the shorter it will sustain itself with the people. So, number of coalitions is inversely related to strong government. On the other hand, the greater the disparity between parties, based on political preference expressed in ballots cast, the easier it is to form government, pass legislation, and survive. Disparity, as expressed by the Gini coefficient of national party returns, varies directly with strong government. As an initial approximation to reality, assume linearity. Then letting C be the number of party combinations that reach 50%, D be the disparity in the form of the Gini coefficient of partisan ballots, we have S as the index for strong government formation. D lies between 0 and 1 and C is never 0. The 100 is there to ensure the index lies between 0 and 100 for the ease of the user. As usual with an index, there are no units of measurement. If everyone in a democracy casts a ballot for the same party, despite options and a lack of oppression, then one-party government is possible in a democracy. It's also a durable idea. Unrestrained government is a recipe for overreach and failure. When Frank McKenna's Liberals won all the seats in 1987 New Brunswick, he appointed several members of his own political party as an opposition party. Two parties of equal strength, which they inevitably become, is a recipe for gridlock. Even discounting that possibility, two parties alone usually represent polar opposites on issues, which results in widely varying government policy as they exchange government opposition places. Hardly a recipe for stable economic development. Multiple parties allow multiple opinions on any given national issue, which is healthy. However, multiple parties make it very likely that no party will have a majority, which in turn makes forming government more difficult. Plus, high numbers of parties allow more ways for gridlock to occur, as well as more ways to break gridlock. What matters for reaching a decision, beside adequate consideration of alternatives, is disparity of partisan sentiment. Of course, Inability to resolve an issue politically can also mean that the issue is not yet mature enough for resolution. Let's look at some examples of how this index of strong government behaves. Here are 8 election results, 4 with 3 parties and 4 with 4. The first 2 3-party examples are typical results that give an indication of the importance of disparity. A shifting of 20 percentage points is incontestably reflected by a significant change in S. The third example has no disparity and therefore S is 0. This is a recurrent finding at any number of parties. These first 3 results each have only 3 ways to form government with at least 50%. The fourth has only 1 way to form government, and so has a high S. The 4-party examples shown on the right have the same pattern of results. 2 samples of likely results, one of equality and one with a plurality winner, with the same pattern of index values. Note that the plurality winner has the highest S value in both groups. Note that the number of majority combinations rises with the number of parties. The same pattern seen previously is seen with 5-party results. If no disparity, then S is 0. A plurality result scores high. The number of combinations to form a majority government is getting quite high. Each combination, except a plurality result, requires negotiation. Multiple levels of negotiations if there are more than 2 combinations. The top result here is similar to a recent Israeli election. The S value is quite low and the number of combinations and negotiations to form government is staggeringly high. Forming government would be, and was, difficult. SMDPR's natural threshold would virtually sweep away participation in government by almost all parties polling less than 10%. The voice of the people would still be highly expressed, but the variations in national questions to be addressed would be limited to the practicable. Parties focus voice on particular issues. They don't impede voice in a democratic sense. Since there are many parties already, it would probably be appropriate to lower that number by raising the threshold. This would be done by reducing the number of matching divisions in each allocation division and raising the number of allocation divisions. All else considered, the index does seem to capture aspects of strong government, but the vastly different S levels for plurality winners with different numbers of parties suggest the relationship is non-linear. Once an index governance viewed in this way is established, looking through historic data, S can be combined with LEM and ALARM using vector techniques. Normalize S to between 0 and 1. Create a vector, the components of which are S, LEM, and ALARM. Use historical data to orthogonalize the components of the vector, ensuring they are independent. Then equalize the components using the norm of the vector. The equalized component value is then an unbiased representation of the 3 components we have established for strong government. Further research is obviously indicated. In the faint hope that thoughtful people will actually look at facts before committing Canada to stagnation and failure, or from leaping into worse situations, here is a list of pros and cons for SMDPR. Facts back up these statements. Not politics, not circular reasoning, not pomposity. The publicly available facts are referenced at the end, as well as the extensive databases constructed therefrom. Voice for all is democracy, and democracy is voice for all. They are the same thing. Ballots split by type, LEM, and ALARM provide universal, objective measures of voice, and they are decisive. SMP is one of the worst democratic systems in the world. It does not provide strong democratic government. It provides strong government for organized minorities under agonarchy. Whatever strong governance eyes, voice, local representation, and unbiased control of the number of political parties seated in the legislature are foundational for democracy to thrive. SMDPR provides it all. SMDPR is the Swedish system, with 33 Canadian allocation division rather than Sweden's 1, and 1 representative per riding rather than 12. So, the performance of SMDPR is well established. In addition, SMDPR with an allocation division with 1 riding is SMP, so it is familiar. SMDPR protects from regionalization and separatist parties better than SMP. SMDPR provides an unbiased way to integrate visible minorities into the political system while representing them with one of their own. Both winning and losing candidates under SMDPR have more power within their party because all are responsible as a team for allocation of seats to the party. Fair representation for all minorities and removal of the plurality rule's divisive gaming potential improves the tenor of politics, making the choice of a life in politics more inviting. Against the constitutional, preferred right to voice is set the plurality rule, which is thoroughly undemocratic, ultimately destructive of peaceful rule and completely lacking in constitutional status. Some of the benefits of combining SMDPR with de many voting and a passive type of constituency assembly are explored in Democratic Voice. A brief